From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Today, we're talking about toxic relationships. And I think this issue is so important because all of us at some point in our lives or another have had to deal with relationships that aren't good or aren't healthy or maybe are just downright destructive. And at some point, we've got to realize, how can we move past that relationship, or how can we redefine that relationship, or how can we recreate that so that it is a positive influence in our lives? And toxic relationships could happen on a personal side. It could be your significant other, or it could be your close friends, or maybe even your family members. Or toxic relationships could be professionally. Perhaps you're just in a job situation that has stagnated, and that environment has become toxic for you. It could happen on a lot of different levels. So let's break that down and look at first, what does a toxic relationship really look like? Like, what defines the relationship as toxic, as poisonous? So I think there are a couple of key things that really indicate it's a toxic relationship. Now, there are hundreds of red flags or warning signs that it could be potentially a toxic relationship. But a lot of those are very subjective, because what's a toxic relationship for one person may be a very healthy relationship for someone else. So I think it's important to look at the key indicators that really say this is a toxic, negative relationship. Because if we don't know what we're looking for, sometimes it's really difficult to actually define if this is a good thing or a bad thing. So first off, a toxic relationship could be any relationship that is a poor or negative influence in your life. So this might be as simple as someone who just wastes your time. This could be that person in your life who maybe you've been friends with, or you've known them for years and years and years, but you find that every time you get together, you sit down and have some meaningless conversation, but there's really no depth in the relationship. And so you walk away from that lunch or that coffee date and you feel like, gosh, that just really wasn't a good use of my time. That doesn't mean that the person's bad or that you don't care for them. It just means that it's not a good, healthy, positive influence in your life. It's not a good use of your time and your energy. A toxic relationship could be one-sided, where you're always the giver in the relationship. Relationships are a balance. It's almost like a dance, and there has to be a give and take on both sides. Because if one person is doing all the giving and one person is doing all the taking, that's not a good, healthy relationship. That's just an emotional vampire. A relationship could be toxic if it's something that's not based on shared positive values. And there again, it comes down to identifying what's important to me and making sure that the relationships I have support that. So for example, I don't have a lot of casual lunch dates with people, and just the friends or the acquaintances that I have, I'm very intentional with my time. I'm more than happy to spend time with people, and I love spending time with people, but the casual meetings where we're not really digging into issues that's going to help either one of us move forward or someone else, where we're adding value and we're talking about really good quality relationship time, those occasions are just really minimal for me. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean you can't have a shopping trip out with one of your friends. But it means that in terms of what I want to do with my time and energy, I'm very focused because I'm very intentional about what I'm doing. My time is precious, and I'm very careful about spending it on activities that either add value to me or add value to someone else. And so anytime I find that a relationship is not in alignment with the things of how I like to spend my energy, then that perhaps could be a negative influence on me. And, of course, we decide what's in alignment with our values and how we spend our time and energy. But be careful that once you've identified the relationships in your life based on where you're going, make sure that they're in alignment. And anything that doesn't fit could be potentially toxic. We talk about this in terms of our kids a lot of times. It's easy when it's your teenager. You think, or you tell your teenager, don't hang around with so-and-so because, that teenager is not a good influence. Maybe they're hanging out with the wrong crowd, or they're doing some of the things that could be bad influences. And you just say, you know what? It's not a good, healthy relationship, and it has the potential to be toxic. If it's not yet, it could be. Well, why are those relationships bad for us? The first thing that we have to look at when we talk about toxic or negative relationships, they're bad for us because we become like the people we spend the most time with. Jim Rohn says we become the average of the 5 people that we choose to spend the most time with. So if you wrote down who is in your circle of 5, are those good, positive people that you want to become like? Because you are going to, we start to dress like the people we spend the most time with. We start to eat like them. We start to talk like them. We start to think like them because we develop the relationship and that time together, and we start to, almost absorb those people and kind of our perception of ourselves. 1 Corinthians 15:33 talks about bad company corrupts good morals. It's just so true that we become like the people we spend the most time with. Proverbs 22:24 warns us. It says, make no friendship with an angry man, lest you become like him and learn his ways. And it is true. We start to, almost like a sponge, we start to soak up the energy of the people that we're spending the time with. And the second thing is those relationships hold us back because they're taking time and energy away from the direction that we know we want to go. Kevin Eikenberry said, look carefully at the closest relationships in your life, for that is the direction that you are heading. And it's so true. You can look at the friends or the close social acquaintances that you have and look at the state of their life, because that's absolutely an indicator of the direction you're going. Now, I probably haven't shared anything with you that's new. I mean, most of you could probably already define what a toxic relationship is for you. And even if you couldn't define it, you know it when you feel it. You know when there's a relationship that just leaves you feeling emotionally down and drained when you spend time with that person. Well, the question becomes, what can we do to eliminate those relationships? How can we get rid of them? We know that they're a negative influence. We know it's an energy drain. We know we don't want to be like that person. What can we do to get rid of those toxic relationships? It really comes down to 3 choices. If you know that you have a relationship personally or professionally in your life that is not healthy, that is a toxic relationship, you've got 3 choices. Number 1, you can live with it. And that's a choice. It absolutely is a choice in itself. That just means that life continues as it is, and it continues to be an energy drain. It continues to hold you back. It continues to pull you down. But it's absolutely a choice. If you're in that job that has become a negative environment, maybe it's a stressful environment, maybe it's an unhealthy job environment, whatever it is, if it's holding you back and you choose to stay there, that's a choice that you make. And like any choice that we make, it comes with consequences. And the consequences simply become we continue to stay stagnant. The second choice you've got is to terminate it. If you've realized that a relationship in your life has become toxic, you absolutely have a choice to end it. Many of you know my story. I left home at 19, and I left home to leave behind a father who sexually abused me for years, and the mother who blamed me for it. And, a few weeks after I left, Mom would come and visit. But every time she would come and visit, she would try to tell me, I was going to hell for leaving home and I wasn't under my parents' supervision anymore. And even though she knew at that time what was going on, she really blamed me for it. But every time she would come to visit, she was just not supportive of me. And it doesn't mean that I that I hold any bitterness toward her, but I realized that was toxic for me. And I just said, you know what? If you can't come back and support me, then don't come back, because I didn't need that negative influence. I already had enough to deal with from just the shame and the pain of going through what I did. I didn't need anyone else also pointing a finger at me and blaming me. And I just said, you know what? Just please don't come back. If you can't be supportive of me, it's better if we just don't have that relationship. So terminating it is always an option. It's not an easy option. Sometimes it's painful to end relationships, personally or professionally. But the pain of staying sometimes is greater than the pain of moving on. And I think that's key. We've got to remember what's really at stake here. And then the third option when you're dealing with a toxic relationship is to renegotiate it. Stephen Covey talks about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, a win-win or no deal. And it really comes down to having a really good conversation with that person and just saying, look, if this relationship can't be a win for both of us, then we decide to move on. And then define what a win looks like. What would a healthy relationship look like? And make sure that you're clear on the same page with the goals for the relationship. What we're really talking about here is relationships by design and instead of by default. And many of us kind of get in a habit of a relationship. And sometimes we look around and realize it's not a great relationship anymore. And that's a good sign that we've kind of been just living by default. So really sit down and be intentional about what this relationship should look like, what I need it to look like, what you need to look like, to make sure that it's mutually supportive and healthy. And once we've eliminated or renegotiated the toxic relationships in our life, I think it's important to talk about how do we prevent them in the future. There's a couple of key points that I think are critical here, and none of us get it right any of the time. But once we know what the clear indicators of a toxic negative relationship could look like, it's easier to be on the alert for them. And so the sooner we can spot them, the sooner we can do something about it, and we can minimize the damage or the stress that it causes. Number 1, setting clear boundaries in any relationship. I think this is so critical. At work, this might look like, for example, when I was working in the hospital environment, I was on salary. And it was so easy in that type of job where I was in compliance that it would be so easy to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week and spend because the job never got done. So you spent all your time there. And even when you weren't at work, you would take work home with you sometimes, and you'd be working even when you were at home. And I realized that I needed to get better about setting clear boundaries of where that would and would not rule my life. If you're in a personal relationship, it might be just setting clear boundaries about when we spend time together, or what would be a violation of the boundary. Being very clear about that. Be clear about what you need from the relationship, so that there can be the same expectation. And then stand up for those boundaries. Dr. Henry Cloud talks about being hard on the issue, but soft on the person. And I really think that's a great way to say, if you feel like someone has crossed over a boundary, regardless of what that boundary is, if it's a boundary that you've set in the relationship and agreed to, and someone has crossed that, then it's time to stand up for that issue and address it. You can still care about the person, but you have to stop and call attention to it and say, hey, this is not okay. And the third thing, I think it's really important to create supportive relationships. There's a great story in Boundaries for Leaders by Henry Cloud. It talks about the story about how relationships can help us deal with stress. And there was a scientific study that they did on a group of monkeys, and they were measuring the cortisol hormone, which is the stress hormone. And they took this one monkey and they put him in the cage and they did a whole bunch of testing on him, but they subjected him to some really loud noises, and they tried to scare him and loud flashing lights, and they really just tried to induce a whole lot of stress on this monkey. And then they studied his cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. And they repeated the study. And the only variable that changed in the repeated study was they put a second monkey in the cage with the first monkey. Same psychological testing, same stress, same loud noises and banging and flashing lights and trying to scare the monkeys. But what was interesting is that the cortisol levels in the second second group of monkeys, where they had two monkeys in the cage, was less than 50% of the first group. 50%. And the only thing that changed was the monkey had a buddy. He had a buddy to go with him in this stressful situation. And we need supporting relationships in our life because those can be positive influences, and they should be positive influences. That helps us deal with the stress. Our brains need positive relationships to encourage us, to lift us up, because we're all going to have days when we just feel down or bad, or maybe you just had a bad day. And we need those positive relationships, those buddies, those best friends, or those caring spouses to just say, hey, I've had a bad day. Let me share it with you. And then let's move forward together. And then I think the last point I need to touch on here is just be very intentional about spotting those warning signs. If you've decided what a toxic relationship looks like for you, it's a time waster, it's a bad influence, you find that your behavior changes and not in a good way when you're around somebody, that's a bad relationship for you. Or maybe it's just one-sided where you're having to do all the lifting and all of the emotional relationship work. It's important that we realize, number one, are we carrying any emotional baggage? And then number two, being careful to spot that in others. There's a great quote that talks about, let me just share it with you. A man with a toothache cannot be in love, Sigmund Freud. And, it really just means that if someone is dealing with an issue themselves, maybe they're just not in a great spot to have a relationship at this point. And it's important that we can realize that and identify that and just say, you know what? It doesn't mean I don't care for you, but now's not a good time for whatever reason. Let that person heal from the toothache so that they can focus on something else. And, we all go through times and seasons of discouragement or hardship. And maybe we're just bouncing back from something and, we're just emotionally at a low time. And it's important to be careful of not making big life decisions when we're in that low spot. Maybe just saying, not now, let's talk about it in a few months. I was in a job situation once where I realized that the company had a policy of hiring convicted felons. And I'm not opposed to that. I think second chances we all need second chances at some point. But the main problem I had was I was in a situation where I was there in the organization, sometimes without any of the other people around. And so it really wasn't a good job relationship for me. And so I had to terminate that. But what I realized was that I needed to be more careful about spotting those warning signs in the next job opportunity. So, this could apply personally and professionally, but those toxic relationships absolutely can hold us back if we're not very intentional about, number one, preventing them. And then number two, if we realize we're in that situation, live with it, terminate it, or just renegotiate it. Relationship capital isn't just an asset, it's a privilege, according to Michael Sciortino. And when we have relationships in our lives, we should consider those a privilege. And that means that other people should consider them a privilege as well. It means not taking it for granted. It means, intentionally building into the relationships. I've got a friend who we don't even live in the same state, but just from time to time, I need to be intentional about sending her a text or picking up the phone and just saying, hey, I'm thinking about you, or let's have a coffee date or something like that. Even those friendships that maybe aren't close, but just those small supportive relationships in our lives, we'd have to be intentional about putting deposits into the relationship. I love the book, The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. It's not a new book. It's been around for a while, but it's such a powerful book on relationships to help you put deposits into relationships. And by the same token, we absolutely have the right to say, hey, the other person should be putting deposits in as well. It doesn't have to be a one-way street here. So, there again, just a few nuggets to help you deal with a relationship that maybe isn't a good thing. First, be intentional about what it looks like. Identify if it's toxic. Number 2, why is it bad for us? Because I think it's important to know why we want to do something about it, and then do something about it. Make a decision to learn to live with it, terminate it, or renegotiate it. Because at the end of the day, if a relationship can't be a win-win, it's got to be a no deal. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.